Just after midnight, on the 26th of September, 1983, a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov was on an ordinary overnight shift in a bunker outside Moscow. His job was to watch a screen. If the screen ever said that the Americans had launched, he was to pick up the phone and the Soviet Union would launch everything back. Tensions were at a knife's edge. 3 weeks earlier, the Soviets had shot down a Korean passenger jet, 269 people dead. And then, that night, the alarm screamed. The screen lit up with one word, launch, one missile, then another, until it showed 5 American missiles inbound. Everything he had been trained for said one thing, pick up the phone. But he didn't. He sat there and he doubted the screen. He reasoned that a real American first strike would be massive, not 5 lonely missiles. He noticed that the ground radar showed nothing, and he decided against every protocol, against the screaming alarm, to call it a malfunction. He was right. It was sunlight glinting off high clouds, fooling the satellites. One man's decision in a few minutes of unbearable pressure is the reason why we're both here today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to make better decisions and why the people who think the most clearly are often the ones who learn to distrust their own certainty. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Inner Propaganda Podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and today, decision-making is on the agenda, which, as Stanislav Petrov reminds us, is occasionally the single most important thing a human being will ever do. Now, most of our decisions are not going to save the planet from nuclear annihilation. Most of them are small. But the machinery your brain uses to make the small ones is the exact same machinery it uses for the big ones. And to show you just how badly that machinery can misfire, even inside one of the most brilliant minds who ever lived, let me tell you about Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was, by any measure, one of the greatest minds our species has ever produced. This man mapped gravity. He invented a whole branch of math, more or less in his spare time. If raw intelligence could protect a person from a terrible decision, it definitely would have protected him. But in 1720, there was a company in England called the South Sea Company, and its shares were the hottest thing in the country. The price climbing in what we'd now call a bubble. Newton bought in early and sold and walked away with a tidy profit. This was a disciplined decision. But then he had to watch. He watched as the price kept climbing, as his friends and neighbors, people far less clever than him, got rich. And he couldn't bear it. So he piled back in, right at the very top of the bubble. And he put in far more money than before. Then the bubble burst and he lost a fortune. Something like the equivalent of millions of dollars today. He's said to have remarked afterwards that he could calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. And here's what I want you to take from that. The man could predict the movements of planets, but yet he could not predict or control his own envy. His intelligence didn't make the decision, his feelings did. And his intelligence very helpfully wrote him justification on the way back in. So if it can happen to Isaac Newton, it can happen to you and me on a Wednesday afternoon. So let's talk about why. Why does a mind that brilliant make a decision so reckless? Because, and this is the thing to really sit with, your brain is not designed to make you happy or successful or right. Your brain is designed to keep you alive. The way it does that is by being a prediction machine. It constantly guesses what's coming next and what you need in order to deal with it. Imagine you're back in our hunter-gatherer days, out on the plains of Africa, and you're with your friend, let's call him Frank, and you both see a lion in the distance. You say, Frank, we need to go. And Frank says, you know what? I reckon I could make friends with that lion. And you say, Frank, it's a lion. And Frank says, no, it'll be fine. I get on well with animals. They're all good. This lion's going to be friendly. Now, at Frank's funeral, what you'd be talking about was how he made a really bad prediction, how he made a really bad decision. But here's the thing. For about 200,000 years, that wiring has done all it can to ensure that we're not eaten. You see the lion, instantly you might remember the fact that your friend Frank was eaten, and your brain triggers the release of adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, into your system so that you're able to get away from that lion. You're able to run, hide, or fight. Preferably not fight, since it is a lion and you're going to die. But a wrong prediction will get you eaten. So the brain knows how to play it safe. It jumps to conclusions fast, and it doesn't waste any energy second guessing. Yet that same ancient wiring now makes our business decisions worse. Because in a boardroom, playing it safe, deciding fast, don't second guess, is very often exactly the wrong instinct. The brain optimizes for survival and certainty. It doesn't optimize for truth. And good decision making is mostly the discipline of overriding it. Now, there are two forces working against you here, and it's worth knowing both. The first is fear, that survival wiring we're talking about. And the second is laziness, and I mean that literally. Your brain runs on about 20 to 25% of the calories that you consume on a daily basis. And it only really makes up 3 to 4% of your body mass. So it's enormously expensive as an organ and is desperate to conserve energy. And the way that it saves energy is by taking shortcuts and defaulting to whatever's easiest, which usually means whatever you did the last time. Let me show you how powerful that default really is. One of my favorite real-world examples. If you look at organ donation rates, in Germany versus Austria, in Germany, fewer than 10% of people are registered donors. Right next door in Austria, a country that's culturally very similar, it's over 90%. What explains the gap that enormous? If it isn't culture or generosity or beliefs about death, it's one tiny thing. In Germany, you have to tick a box actively in order to opt in. In Austria, you're already opted in and you have to tick a box in order to opt out. That's it. The life or death decision of where your organs will go once you're dead was never really made by most individuals. It was made by whoever designed the form. We don't decide nearly as often as we think we do. A huge amount of time, we just go with whatever the default is. Because the default is easy, and the brain loves easy. So how do we make genuinely good decisions instead of letting a frightened, lazy prediction machine brain doing all the work for us? Well, I use a simple toolkit. I call it the 4 Ds. Diffusion, debiasing, decision modeling, and discernment. Let me take you through the 2 that matter the most and touch the others as we go. The first is diffusion, and it just means to take the heat out before you decide. Remember, your feelings don't just sit alongside reality, they become your reality. So a decision made at the peak emotion is always a worse decision. When you're furious or terrified or wildly excited, that's precisely the moment to not decide. Build in a gap. Sleep on it. Walk on it. Write it down first. You're not delaying the decision. You're letting the part of the brain that can actually think show up in order to make it. The second is debiasing, and this is about catching the shortcuts. The big one, of course, is confirmation bias. We go looking for evidence that we're right and dismiss evidence that contradicts us. And the age we're living in, this is getting even more dangerous, not less, because we built ourselves machines that flatter us. If you take AI, more often than not, let's say ChatGPT, you type almost anything into it and it will be extremely nice to you, even sycophantic. It will tell you how wonderful you are, how smart you are, how brilliant you are. When I sent it chapters of my own book, it told me how an amazing writer I was. It said that I was the best writer it had seen since Steinbeck or Hemingway. Now, as much as I wanted to believe it, I knew it wasn't true. But it felt really, really good. The problem is that feeling might make me feel good in the moment, but it's not so good in terms of helping me make the smartest decision. So these biases exist just as much in artificial intelligence as they do in our own brains. And what we need to do is we need to be on the watch for them. We need to look for any form of what is known as motivated reasoning. This tendency we have to be able to steer our brains towards what we want to believe over what's actually true. We need to recognize the biases, because as soon as we notice the impact they're having, that can mitigate the influence that those biases have over us. And this is a perfect time for me to share. I hope, if you haven't already, you will consider getting a copy of my book, Inner Propaganda. It is finally out. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any bookstore near you. Hopefully, most bookstores near you will stock it. But it is the product of so many years that I've spent investigating everything I could to understand how beliefs work. I really hope that you find it useful. There's an entire chapter just about decision making where I go more deeply into Petrov and his decisions and this 4-part model. So I hope you'll consider getting a copy. You can also go to innerpropaganda.com for more information on the book. But back to the third and fourth strategies that are particularly helpful and useful. The next is decision modeling. And this is really about structuring the decisions that you want to make and figuring out what are the different steps that you need to take in order for you to make the best kinds of decisions. Just some tips on this is that you want to be able to understand for every decision, what is the short-term benefit and the short-term negative consequence of each decision or each choice? What is the long-term benefit and the long-term negative consequence for each choice? What evidence supports each choice? And spending some time thinking about what it would be like if you were wrong, in other words, doing what we call a pre-mortem, are all strategies that could help you make sure that your decision strategy is much more effective. But finally, we have discernment. This is when you bring in real rigor, and it's when you're looking at whatever it is that you have to make a decision on and looking to be able to challenge your assumptions in the most effective way. It's also the one that turns you most into Petrov instead of the panicking soldiers that surrounded him. So I want to go back to that bunker because there's a lesson in it that most people miss. The most important decision in modern history was made by a man who refused to trust the most confident signal in the room. The screen said launch. The alarm said launch. The training said launch. But Petrov looked at the most official, most certain, most high-tech information available to him, and he asked one question. Does this actually make sense? Why would a real attack be only 5 missiles? Why is the ground radar showing nothing? He went hunting for the evidence that he might be wrong. And he saved the world. That's discernment. And it has a name as an active practice, red teaming. You deliberately appoint someone, even if it's just yourself, to argue why your decision is wrong, why it'll fail, what you're not seeing. Not to be negative, but to find the crack before reality does. And the engine of it is one question. What would have to be true for me to be wrong about this? And then going looking for it. The reason this is so hard is that we're spectacularly overconfident about how much we understand. There's a beautiful piece of research where people were asked to rate how well they understood everyday objects, like a toilet or a zipper or a carburetor. Most rated themselves pretty highly. Then the researchers asked, now could you explain exactly how it works? That's when people fell apart. When people were asked to rate their understanding again afterwards, they collapsed. And when people were asked to rate their understanding again afterwards, the scores collapsed. They call it the illusion of explanatory depth. We think we understand things, but we don't. So the most useful thing you can do before a big decision is to try to explain your own reasoning out loud, in full, as if to a skeptic. Because that's the moment that you discover whether you actually understand it or whether you've just been feeling like you do. Now, there's one more trap that ruins smart people's judgment, and the former poker champion and expert on decision-making, Annie Duke, nailed it in her book, Thinking in Bets. We judge our decisions by how they turned out. It worked, good decision. It failed, bad decision. But that's completely backwards because life is not chess. In chess, everything's on the board. No luck, no hidden cards. But life is more like poker. There's luck, there's hidden information, there's randomness. Which means you can make a brilliant decision with the information you had and still lose the bad luck. And you can make a reckless, foolish, terrible decision and still get lucky. So if you only grade yourself on outcomes, you'll learn exactly the wrong lessons. You'll punish the thinking that got unlucky, and you'll reward bad thinking that happened to win. Annie Duke has a wonderful habit that I'd steal. Whenever you say you're certain about something, put a number on it. How certain? 70%? 80%? Then ask yourself how much of your own money you'd actually bet on it at those odds. It's amazing how fast I'm absolutely certain becomes, well, maybe 70-30. The moment that real money's on the line. So the next time you review a decision that went wrong, separate the two questions cleanly. Was it a bad decision or a good decision with a bad result? Get that distinction right, and you stop learning the wrong lessons for your own life. Now, there's a tension here I have to name, because it trips up leaders constantly. Everything that I told you is about doubt. Challenge your certainty, hunt for the crack, distrust the confident signal. But here's the paradox. The people that you lead don't want to watch you doubt. Imagine the coach at halftime going, look, we're losing. I mean, maybe we could catch up. I don't know. Probably not. But, maybe try to do your best. People follow conviction, especially in uncertain times. So you have to have the ability to hold both. I call it the conviction paradox. In private, with yourself, with your leadership team, you challenge every assumption. You red team hard. You ask, how might you be wrong? And then once you've actually done that work and made the call, you communicate it with genuine conviction. Doubt is for deciding. Conviction is for the leading. The mistake is doing them in the wrong order, projecting certainty to the room before you've done the doubting in the room. And so let's go back to the bunker one last time. Petrov didn't save the world because he was the bravest man in the room or the most senior. The soldiers around him were trained to obey the screen. He was an engineer by background, trained to question the system, to look for what didn't add up. That was the whole difference. In a moment where everyone else was certain, he was the one willing to ask whether the certainty was real. And that's the skill. Most of the time, the loudest, most confident, most official signal in the room is not the same thing as the truth. Good decision-making isn't about being clever or being fast. It's about willing in the moment that you most want to act to pause and quietly ask yourself, but does this actually make sense? And have I really looked? Do that and you'll spare yourself a great many of the decisions that you'd regret, the kind even Isaac Newton couldn't avoid. And occasionally, who knows, maybe you'll even save the world. So that's it for this week. I hope you found this one useful. I hope it helps you to make even better decisions. And please do check out my book. It is available in stores now around the United States of America, Inner Propaganda. You can go to innerpropaganda.com or get a copy at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or your favorite store. But if you did enjoy the episode, please subscribe and please let more people know about it and rate and review if you've heard the episode on Spotify or iTunes or any of the podcast players out there. But hopefully, this will help you to not only make better decisions yourself, but also help others as well. Until we meet again, may the forces always be with you, and may you continue to be the very best version of you. Bye for now.